live from beautiful Iroquois Urban Farm, which is in South Louisville, near Hazelwood Elementary, if any of you go there, or if you just know the neighborhood. We're close by to Iroquois Park, and that is where we are hanging out today in our vegetable field. So we grow a lot of vegetables with the Food Literacy Project. That's where I work. And today I'm going to talk to you about soil, because soil is a super important part of growing fruits and vegetables. If we don't have good, healthy soil, then a lot of times our stuff won't grow as well as we want it to. And so soil is where everything starts. It's where our plants take root. It's where they are able to get their food and their water. And so having really good, healthy soil is super important if you're interested in having a garden or growing food outside. So we're going to talk a little bit about soil texture today. We have an activity for you guys called Soil Shakeup that'll help you look at your soil texture in any pots that you plan to plant vegetables, or if you have a backyard that you plan to start a garden in. Looking at soil texture will help you figure out if you have good soil for your plants to put their roots down. So when we talk about soil texture, we're talking about the way it feels. So if you pick up soil from the ground, how it feels between your fingers, okay? So there's three things that we often think about when we are thinking about our soil texture. And those three things are clay, silt, and sand. And you've probably heard of some of these, but maybe you haven't heard of all of them. So I'm going to tell you what each of these things are so that you know what we're talking about. So clay, when we think about clay, we're thinking about the same thing that you use in like pottery, or if you've ever seen like a clay flower pot. It gets really hard when it's dry, and when it's wet, it's really slippery. And the reason that it gets really hard when it's dried, and the reason it's really slippery when it's wet, is because it's a teeny tiny particle. And when we say particle, we're thinking of what it's made of. So teeny tiny components of our soil. So clay is super small, and each individual piece of clay is so small that if you were to look at it, that you can't see it under like a normal microscope. And so what happens is it gets smushed together and it makes up clay that you can actually see and feel. So when it gets smushed together, it looks kind of like this. And it kind of gets smushed together into flatter pieces. And so this is lots and lots of different pieces of clay together. Our second component of our soil is silt. And silt, you can think of, if you've ever baked with flour, that's kind of like what it would feel like if you were to feel just silt. It's bigger than clay, quite a bit bigger. We'll think of it more as like that size dot. But it's still like pretty small. Again, think of it like you would flour that you bake with. And then the third thing is sand. And sand, compared to these two particles, is really big. And you've probably seen sand before. If you've gone to like the river, there's sand beside that. If you have like a sandbox in your backyard or a playground that you go to, you've maybe seen it there. So sand is a lot bigger. So when we think about sand, you can think of it like kind of this size. And I drew it kind of jagged, and that's because sand is like little pieces of rock. So we all know what a rock is, right? So here's a rock. So when you think of sand, you can think of it as like a really teeny one of these. So these are the three things that make up most soils, especially in Kentucky. So we have a helpful triangle to show you that's in your soil shakeup activity that helps you think about what soil looks like. So this looks really complicated probably, and maybe uses even some words that you've never seen before. But you know these words now: clay, silt, and sand. And this triangle just helps us think about how much of each one of these three things we have in our soil. So you can see that these are kind of the different types of soil that if you were a soil scientist, which is a job that you can have, or something you can study in school is soil science, then you would memorize all of these different kinds of soil. We're not going to do that today, but we are going to look at soil samples to kind of try to figure out where we fit on our soil triangle, okay? So it's based on percentages, which just means how much of something is in the whole total, right? So if something is 50% clay, for example, it would be half of your clay, or half of your soil would be clay. So it takes into account percentages, but we're not going to get that in depth. We're just going to try to figure out kind of where our soil lies and how much of each thing we have in it, okay? So this is in your activity if you want to look at it closer. So what we do to look at soil is, first of all, we have to take a sample. So the way that we take a sample is I used this tool. And some of you may have this at your house. A lot of people use this to dig holes in the ground before they plant things inside of it. If you don't have one of these, that's okay. You can use a trowel, so like a hand shovel. You can also just use your hand and grab a big handful of dirt, okay? So don't be afraid to get your hands a little dirty. You can see that mine already are. So go ahead and just take a big handful of whatever soil you have, okay? And what you're gonna do is put it in a jar. And I'm gonna show you, I already have a jar that's got soil in it that's been sitting for a little while. So I'm not gonna shake it up right now, but you would put it in your jar, add water all the way to the top, and then you're just gonna shake it. You're just gonna take this jar and shake it as hard as you can for about 5 minutes, okay? So just shake it, give yourself a good workout, so that you can get everything good and mixed up, okay? So we had taken our sample of soil and we put it in a jar and filled it up here with water, and then shook it really, really hard for about 5 minutes and then let it sit overnight. So this has been sitting for about 24 hours. And what happens if you let it sit for about a day is that you start to see things settle out. And so what happens is the things that are heaviest, so if you remember, sand was my biggest particle, and then it was silt, and then it was clay, it was teeny tiny, right? So what do you think is gonna be heaviest? It's gonna be the sand, right? Because it's the biggest thing. So the sand is gonna float all the way to the bottom, and so what's gonna be in the middle? It's gonna be the silt. It's gonna be kind of in the middle, and then your clay is gonna be at the top once everything kind of settles out, because again, it settles out by weight. So the heaviest thing goes to the bottom, the medium heavy things go in the middle, and then the lightest things are gonna be at the top. So we're gonna look at our jar together, and I'm gonna show you kind of like what our soil looks like in this field. And this soil has been a work in progress. So where we farm there used to be buildings all over it. And so we've been working on building up the soil and making it better. So I'm going to show you what it looks like, and it's not the perfect soil for growing vegetables, but you can see that we are growing things out here. So like I said, it's a work in progress, which is fine. So if your backyard soil is not super perfect, don't stress, because we can make it better, and I'll tell you some things that we do to make our soil a little better. But I'll also show you another sample that's we have some raised garden beds on this property that were filled with good quality raised bed soil. So I'll show you what that looks like too, so that you kind of have some comparison. So words, but hopefully you can see where there's some like air gaps and there's some darker, you can kind of see that it's dark starting about here and gets darker as it goes down. So again, what do you think that is? That's going to be sand. So we have a little bit of sand in this soil, probably about, that much out of this much. So we're going to estimate. You can use a ruler and measure it to get your estimations, but we're going to estimate. And I'm going to say that out of this whole chunk, because this is all water, right? That's water that's risen to the top. Out of this whole chunk, that's probably 20%. We're going to say we have about 20% sand in our soil. So the rest of this, you can see that there's not a whole lot of difference between that and the rest of our soil. I happen to know that this soil is very, very clay heavy. There's a lot of clay. It's very slippery when you touch it. It slides between your fingers. So I'm going to say that the rest of this is clay, because you can't really see a difference between this and the rest of our soil, right? So most of this is clay, and we have a little bit of sand. Sand is a good thing. We want sand to be mixed in with our clay. Why do you think that is? I said it was the biggest particle, right? So if it's mixed in to the clay sand, it's giving space in our soil. And why do we want space for plants? Yeah, we want space because we want space for our roots to spread out. We want space for water to trickle in because plants need water to drink, right? If everything is just flat and hard, then water's just gonna run off, right? So we want space in our soil so that our water can get in there and get to our plants' roots, which have spread out. So we like sand. We like some amount of sand in our soil, especially if we have a lot of clay. So that's what our soil looks like. And so this is a super easy way to look at it. Now if I was to look at the raised bed soil, which I have the sample, I'll be right back. I have this sample, which I also did the same thing. I took a sample out of a raised bed, I put it in a jar, I shook it up for about 5 minutes, and let it all settle out, right? So all this is water, there's some mulch floating at the top, and that's okay. But this is what we're looking at down here. So you can see a lot more of a difference in this one, right? So down here, it's like we said, the heaviest things go to the bottom, which is sand. Sand's gonna go to the bottom. So you can see the sand starts about right here and goes all the way down, right? So you can kind of see that there's air pockets even. So that's great for our plants. Lots of space for the roots to spread out, lots of space for water to get in. And then you can see it gets lighter kind of in this little section, right? You can see that it changes about right here, but then it changes again about right here, right? So this stuff in the middle is silt. So that's that stuff that's the medium-sized particle. So it's not the biggest, and it's not teeny tiny, but it's somewhere in the middle. And that's good too, because even though it's not as big as sand, if we had all sand, too much water would run through potentially, or we'd have too much space. And we want something that kind of binds the soil together, holds it together, so that our roots don't just go all over the place and our plants can't stand up straight. So silt is good for that. It provides some structure that also provides a little bit of space for air and water to move through. So we like silt. Silt is very good for our soil. So we're really happy to see that there's this much silt. There's a little bit of sand, there's a lot of silt, and then at the very, very top, this lighter color, that if you remember, is the same color as this, right? So that's gonna be our clay. So there's a little bit of clay in this, and that's okay, because clay is good too. It also helps provide some structure to the soil to let our plants stand up straight and get tall. But you can see that it's the least amount of all three of our particles, right? Mostly silt, a little bit of sand, and a very little bit of clay. So that's good. So if we go back to our triangle, which I have down here, and we look at it, and so remember this is in the activity that you have, then you remember the first thing we said about our soil, our first soil sample, was that it was about 80% clay and about 20% sand, right? So if we go over here, if we follow this line over, it doesn't even register, right? We just have what we call clay soil. And that's okay. We're growing food out here, like I said. We have a little bit of sand, but we're also working on it. We're working on it. We're mixing in what we call organic matter. So old plants, manure, which adds nutrients, but it also adds organic matter. So that helps to break down clay-heavy soil. So if you have soil and it looks a lot like that first jar that I showed you, that's okay. You can still grow food. You can see everything that's growing behind me. But you may want to work in some dead plant material. If you have weeds that you pull out of your yard, you can mix those in and let them sit for a while and break down and become smaller particles, little teeny pieces. That'll help break up your soil and give more space for roots and water to flow. The second sample that you saw from the raised garden beds, the good raised bed soil, you remember it was mostly silt, right? It was probably about 60% silt, maybe even like 70. And it was probably about 20, 30% sand, right? So So we like to say that that kind of fits in this silt loam or silty clay loam area. And that's really good because again, silt's really good for providing structure. Sand is really good for providing space for air and water to move. So that's what we really want to see when we're thinking about good soil. So we encourage you all to go out in your backyard or find a pot that has soil in it that you want to try to grow a vegetable in, and just dig a little bit. Get your hands dirty, put it in a jar, shake it up with some water, let it sit for an hour, and go back and check it out. What does it look like? Can you see any differences? Has anything started to settle? Go back after a day, check it out. Has it settled at all? What can you see? What can you notice? Go back after 2 days, 3 days, and make some observations on what you're seeing in your soil. And figure out if you think it's if you need to add any sand to it, or if you need to add any organic matter to make it kind of better to grow our vegetables in. So we encourage you to go outside and get your hands dirty and look at your soil and figure out what you have going on before you plant your garden or plant anything else in it, because soil is super important to make sure that we have a good background, a good base to grow all of our food in. So thank you for joining us today. We hope you learned something. We hope you got your hands dirty. We hope you tried something new. And we hope to see you again soon. Bye.